Hey everyone, how's it going? In this video, I'll be discussing a really big idea. I'll be discussing what a world without money might look like and how this type of economy could be the solution for many of the problems our world faces today. Problems like debt, poverty, homelessness, hunger, and the unaffordability of healthcare. We're going to start with a broad overview of the different types of economies and how they use money. Then we'll narrow in on the specific issues created by the money systems in place today. And to end it, we'll discuss a world without money as the solution for these problems, as well as possible ways to help society get there. So let's ask the obvious question. What do we use money for? Well, the obvious answer, to buy things. We use money to buy food, clothing, to pay our bills. It's what we get paid with for our work, and it's what we use for all the other things in life that we refuse to do without. This is the typical way money's used in modern societies, but there are variations depending on the economy in place. There are 4 main types of economies, and most people learned about this in high school. But as a review, these 4 types are traditional, command, market, and mixed. A traditional economy is the oldest type of economy. It exists in hunter-gatherer nomadic societies and centers around families and tribes. This economy relies heavily on the barter system, where people trade something that they have for something else that they want. Society in a traditional economy produces only what is needed, and as a result, there's minimal waste. Eventually, over time, when farming and settling is developed, excess goods can then be stored for trade, and a form of currency develops. A traditional economy can have elements of capitalism, socialism, and communism depending on how they're set up. The problem with these types of economies is that they are extremely vulnerable to changes in nature, and these changes can devastate the trade economy. Here are some dictators that you might recognize. Each one of them ruled their nation with a command economy in place. In a command economy, the government creates a central economic plan. This plan sets the priorities for the production of all goods and services. The government then allocates resources according to this central plan. In this type of economy, the government owns a monopoly on all forms of business, and it creates laws and regulations to enforce the central plan. A command economy doesn't rely on the laws of supply and demand, as the government decides what to produce for the people and when, according to its own goals. Because the government owns all means of production, it has the ability to manipulate large amounts of resources for large projects, such as in response to natural disasters, food shortages, and war. In this type of society, innovation is not encouraged. The government decides what your job is, and the government decides what will or will not be produced. In a market economy, there's a limited government. In this type of economy, you can own private property and private businesses. You have the freedom to choose where to spend your money. You're essentially voting for the market you want with how you spend your dollars. The theory is our natural motive for self-interest will lead us to create and consume things that do the most good. This type of economy breeds competition and lends itself towards efficiency, where producers are motivated to create something for the lowest cost possible to get the business of the consumer. Here, supply and demand determines the market. Because of the competitive nature of this economy, there are high rewards for innovation. If you create a faster, cheaper way to provide a good or service, you'll be able to succeed against other competitors who can't provide this good or service at your lower price. That being said, this type of economy has no system in place for preventing competitive disadvantages. Over time, a market economy stacks the deck in favor of those who have more resources. Over time, it becomes impossible for the common person to compete with the large company who has more time and money to innovate and create cost-effective products. This type of economy tends to accentuate disparity in society. In a mixed economy, principles from traditional command and market economies are in place. A mixed economy generally operates on the same principles of a market economy, but it leaves more room for the government to step in and take over entire industries if need be. Here, the government is still limited, but it can now operate as a market participant and safeguard against collapses in crucial markets like international trade, transportation, and energy. A mixed market economy has been praised as the most successful of the four types because it offers the best of worlds. It embraces free market capitalist principles and couples them with command economy-esque safety nets that provide regulations in markets that prevent key sectors from collapsing. Because of the stability it offers, most Western nations use the mixed economy. But for all its success, it still has many problems. These problems grow over time and with society, as capitalist principles fall out of balance. The Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines capitalism as an economic system with private ownership of goods, where prices are determined mainly by competition in a free market. In theory, competition is supposed to drive the market and motivate people to find ways to innovate and refine. Though these may have been the initial starting conditions of the free market, as time has gone by, the landscape of the free market has changed drastically, and the current conditions look nothing like the initial conditions where such a system seemed beneficial. The initial conditions of a free market are not the current conditions of today's so-called free market. Today, the market is dominated by a handful of corporations that own everything. Here are the corporations that produce everything you watch. Here are the corporations that produce everything you drive. And here are the corporations that produce everything you consume. The very same principles that have built a strong economy, if left unchecked, could lead to its eventual downfall. The dangers of an unchecked capitalist system have been warned of, dating back almost as far as its creation. Historically, corporations were perceived as dangerous. In The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776 by Adam Smith, he explained that corporations presented a conflict of interests. Traditionally, corporations were thought of as only legitimate in specific industries, but this all changed with the introduction of the 14th Amendment and a headnote mentioned in a U.S. Supreme Court case. The 14th Amendment was adopted into the U.S. Constitution on July 9, 1868. It grants equal protection of the law to all U.S. citizens and was part of the Reconstruction era following the abolition of slavery, intending to establish civil and legal rights for African Americans. Although not specifically mentioned in the 14th Amendment or anywhere in the Constitution, corporations historically had sought after the same rights guaranteed to individuals, such as the right to own property, enter into contracts, and to sue. In 1886, corporations were officially granted this right. In the case of Santa Clara County v. Southern Pacific Railroad, a headnote quoting the Chief Justice read, "The court does not wish to hear argument on the question whether the provision of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution which forbids a state to deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law applies to these corporations. We are of the opinion that it does." And with this headnote, the status of personhood was officially granted to corporations, and the market has not been the same ever since. Capitalism today has fallen out of balance, and it seems to be doing society more harm than good. The principles of capitalism have been taken to their extreme by corporate entities and have created multiple problems in the United States. Problems like corporate oligarchies, creation of political action committees, purposeful waste in the name of profit, the loss of opportunities for the economically disadvantaged due to the creation of economic barriers, the fact that the low-hanging fruit has already been taken, and that those aiming for further innovation suffer competitive disadvantages against the corporations. For the sake of clarity, here's the definition of an oligarchy. And here are a few examples throughout history of warnings against corporate oligarchies. A quote from a letter attributed to Abraham Lincoln in 1864 reads, "As a result of war, corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working on the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed." A 1934 article from the Kentucky Law Journal also warned of this dangerous future where a few corporations controlled everything. The author warned that by 1950, about 200 corporations would be controlling production and dominating the industries. They would be concentrating their wealth and their economic power. Today, the conditions are even worse than that. And here's what renowned scientist, historian, and philosopher Noam Chomsky has to say about it.
It's a tyrannical system. in which power is more and more going into the hands of totalitarian structures which are unaccountable, namely private corporations. As has long been understood, these are tyrannical structures. They are like totalitarian states. They combine in the command center judicial, legislative, and executive powers. They're pretty much unaccountable to anyone. They're huge in scale by now. They were created for distorting markets, and they carry out extreme market distortion. They internalize risk. They free participants from market discipline, and they have a million other ways of undermining markets, whether one thinks markets are good or bad.
Super PACs are like political action committees, but on steroids. These are committees that can raise unlimited funds from individuals, corporations, or other groups in support of or against political agendas. They are tax exempt under 22 U.S.C. 527. They can run ads, they can make phone calls, they can send mail, and everything else under the sun. Their only limitation is that they can't directly contribute more than $15,000 to a campaign. There are no limitations on who can contribute, how much they can contribute, and how much a super PAC can spend on influencing an election. This is troublesome because it gives their corporations de facto power to influence laws and elect leaders that are more favorable to them, and the regular people have no way to fairly compete against this kind of behemoth. 2 court cases in 2010 allowed for the creation of super PACs, and since then, billions have been spent trying to influence the election. Another problem created by runaway capitalism is that of intentional waste. Many companies intentionally create waste by throwing away products rather than donating or selling them at a discount. If you were to search online, you'll find many videos of people dumpster diving behind stores and finding perfectly good items that were thrown away after they were returned or marked down. It is estimated that around $50 billion worth of products are thrown away each year. This aggressive pursuit for profitability is praised in a capitalistic system, but it seems to undermine the very principles capitalism sought to establish. The average person at face value can see how this is wasteful and counterintuitive. Just because it makes sense on paper with invented capitalistic formulas doesn't mean it makes practical sense or is efficient in the real world. These wasteful practices shock the conscious not only because of the lack in need we see in people around us, but also because these practices are depleting valuable resources from the earth and are turned into unusable landfill waste. Another problem that is directly related to capitalism is the creation of economic barriers which result in the loss of opportunity for those less fortunate. There's no denying the fact that there are more opportunities available to those in developed nations versus underdeveloped nations. How many Einsteins and Hawkings are we losing because of poverty, economic barriers, and loss of opportunity? How many brilliant minds are losing the chance to change the world simply because they lack the access to education and technology necessary to help develop these new innovations? But this question shouldn't be reserved exclusively for underdeveloped nations. It's a question that must be asked in capitalist systems where there are economic barriers in place that prevent the less fortunate from access to these same opportunities. A 2011 movie, In Time, demonstrates the concept of economic barriers in a scene where the main character is trying to travel from the slums of a town to a town of riches and affluence. The closer he gets to his destination, the more he has to pay to be allowed entrance at each booth. The economic barriers of our world are the result of the system in place that charges absurd amounts for vital resources like education, housing, and healthcare. Those fortunate enough to have been born into wealth don't have to worry about the same types of economic barriers. Thus, they have greater success and access to opportunities. This creates a type of domino effect. Rather than worrying about juggling a part-time job with school, those with wealth have more time to focus, learn, and improve. What's worse is that we have seen countless times how a capitalist system that motivates people by profit is highly susceptible to corruption. The most recent and shocking example of this can be seen in Operation Varsity Blues. This was a college scandal where many affluent people paid bribes to have their children admitted to top universities.
SAT scores to presenting students as top athletes in sports they never even played.
It is a little enraging.
Closely related to loss of opportunity is the problem of competitive disadvantage. As discussed, the current landscape of the free market is dominated by corporate oligarchies. Because these companies are so large, they put any other entrepreneur and business person at a competitive disadvantage. Smaller startups are either crushed or bought out by the corporate giants. And those who refuse to play by their rules suffer disadvantages so severe that it is nearly impossible to successfully compete. Larger corporations have the advantage of funding, technology, research and development, brand recognition, and scalability. For example, let's say that you wanted to go out and become a shoe designer. Well, to bring our ideas to life, you would need all the other necessary components of that infrastructure. Most companies don't have to worry about this because they have the necessary components of the infrastructure, and if they don't, they have the money to buy them. The futility of competing in this market frustrates many people. Even for those with success in other areas, it's difficult branching out and bringing ideas to life in new areas. Here's a clip of Kanye West calling out some of the big corporations that he feels stonewalled by.
Nike, Google. Now who's gonna be the Medici family and stand up and let me create more? Or do you want to marginalize me till I'm out of my moment?
Or why don't you empower yourself and don't need them and do it yourself?
How, Sway?
Take a few steps back to go.
You ain't got the answers, man. You ain't got the answers.
The metaphor of the low-hanging fruit is used to represent the idea of obtaining the most easily accessible rewards. This metaphor also implies that there are other rewards to be obtained, but that they will require much more effort. This metaphor translates pretty well when you think about the effort it takes to pick an apple from a near branch compared to the effort it would take to climb a tree and get an apple from a higher branch. In today's world, we've already obtained the low-hanging fruits. The spork has already been invented. We have created almost all of the simple things, and we have progressed to using machines, computing, and genetics to build our new advancements. We have genetically modified foods to battle drought. We have electricity. We have automation, we have algorithms, and we have simulations. We are in a time where future innovation and advancement requires much more effort. Based on where we are today, it's apparent that the low-hanging fruit of human invention has been taken. We have been through the Industrial Revolution, we have been through the Technological Revolution, and we are working towards the Genetic and AI Revolution. To further advance society, people need access to these resources and the opportunity to learn how to apply the technology, the tools, and the information. And circling back, all of this isn't possible without access to these resources, and the idea that people can independently innovate and create and successfully compete against large companies is a lie. So we have all these problems and we need a solution, and fast. I think that a solution can be found in a society without money. And this isn't a new idea either. Here's a 1974 clip of Jacques Fresco discussing this idea on Larry King.
Entire money-structured and materialistic-oriented society is a false society. 10 or 15 years from now, our society will go down in history as the lowest development in man. We have the brains, the know-how, the technology, and the feasibility to build an entirely new civilization.
You believe that we teach competition, that it's not bred into some...
Competition is dangerous, socially offensive, considered right and normal, because you are brought up to that value system. What kind of competition did Jesus have? What kind of competition is there in your body? Suppose your brain said, I'm the most important organ, and the liver said, I am, and I want to go a free enterprise system. You'd rot away in a month if every organ of your body went out for itself.
Making a transition into this type of society would require us all to work together and overcome our generalized fear of change. Our minds tend to invent many worst-case scenarios when faced with uncertainty. There is a generalized fear that a world without money would not be able to function due to the greed and lack of motivation of others. Well, here's a snippet of a TED Talk from Jade Saab addressing these very
So a world
fears.
without money doesn't mean that work will stop being done. It just means that why and how we do work will change. The social reasons of why work exists in the first place will naturally rise to the top. A world without money also doesn't mean anarchy. Our conception of anarchy is tied to one of the core principles of economics, that we all behave in a way that maximizes self-interest. So we need something like money to control us, to keep a lid on things. But I ask you, is this a fair assessment of human nature? Or are current trends of hoarding and, just keeping all the wealth to ourselves a result of this system? A system that puts money before anything else. If we didn't have to think about money, would we be looking to hoard it or just look to improve ourselves? None of us look at ourselves and think, oh yeah, I'm the greedy hoarding type. So why do we quickly accuse others of this behavior?
A world without money is meant to address many of the problems invented by runaway capitalism. In a world that has evolved beyond capitalism, a basic standard of living and equal access of opportunity can be guaranteed for all. In 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave his State of the Union. In this State of the Union, he discussed many things essential in what he called a Second Bill of Rights. And before I leave you on this note of inspiration, I just wanted to say thank you for those who made it this far. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to subscribe, leave comments. I want to hear what you think about it, and stay tuned for part 2, where I'll be discussing ideas on how society can make this post-capitalistic transition.
The right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.